Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Museum of the City of New York. My name is Fran Rosenfeld, and I am the Director of Public Programs here at the museum. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's conversation, The Data We Don't See, with Giorgia Lupi. And she is going to give a presentation about our new data reality. I don't know if you knew we were living in a new data reality in 2020, and she's going to share with us her unique philosophy of data humanism, unique philosophy for understanding and working with data. After her presentation, she is going to sit down for a conversation with Amanda Cox, who is the data editor at the New York Times. So we're also very excited to have artist and designer Zara Stasi here this evening, who will come out shortly. And she is going to live capture the program, tonight's program. And then you should be looking out in the next few days for her visual output on our social media channels, which will recap the story of tonight's event. This is a first for us, so we're really thrilled to have her here. Tonight's program accompanies the museum's current exhibition, Who We Are, Visualizing NYC by the Numbers, which not only examines the significance of the 2020 census for the city's future, but also considers the deeper political, cultural, and social implications of determining who we are as New Yorkers. And I'd now like to introduce our speakers for this evening. Giorgia Lupi is an information designer and partner at Pentagram, the international design consultancy. In 2011, she co-founded Acura, a data-driven research, design, and innovation firm with offices in Milan and New York. Her work is part of the permanent collections of the Museum of Modern Art and the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, and her TED Talk on her humanistic approach to data has over 1 million views. She's published 2 books, Dear Data and Observe, Collect, Draw, a visual journal. She also has an installation in our Who We Are exhibition upstairs called What Counts. And many of you probably already know this, but if you don't, this is an opportunity for you in the gallery to create your own data portrait button and then get it printed in our museum shop for just $2. And then we are honored to be joined for the conversation by Amanda Cox, who is the data editor at the New York Times and editor of the Upshot column, which examines politics, policy, and everyday life through visual and interactive formats. She is a leader in the field of data visualization and teaches courses at the NYU School of Journalism. So we feel very honored to have these wonderful, brilliant guests with us here tonight. Won't you please join me in welcoming Giorgia Lupi to the stage for her presentation.
Hi, everyone. How are we doing? Thanks, everybody, for coming. I'm really excited. So my name is Giorgia, and this evening I'll explore with you the intersection between information, specifically data, and design. And I believe it's a pretty crucial moment in time to be having this conversation, so hopefully it'll be inspiring for you. I define myself as an information designer, and that means that every day with my team, I shape and design different ways that my clients and their clients access different kind of information, and particularly in my case, data. And data that can be qualitative, quantitative, big and small, data that organizations already have, or actually most of the time crafted by myself and my team in collaboration with our clients. And data that then we represent visually, really translating numbers into images through data visualization and through building interactive experiences with these visualizations. And my work with data is very particular and visually driven. And to give you a sense, I'll play you a montage of the work that we did in the past years with Acura, the company that I co-founded 9 years ago, and where I was the design director up until last year. And in the images that you will see, every shape, color, size, position, and animation of the elements are direct representations of data points. So you start seeing how many different shapes data can take, and before getting to the very core that I want to talk about tonight, I want to also give you a quick idea of the variety of data-driven projects that you can work with and work on from a design perspective, and on the other way around, on design projects that you can approach from a data-driven perspective. For example, in the past 9 years, we spanned from working with newspapers and magazines, and this is a very early collaboration with the Sunday cultural supplement of Corriere della Sera, which is the main Italian newspaper, where from 2012 to 2014, we designed more than 40 data analysis and visualizations, but probably not the visualizations that you would expect on a national newspaper. So every week, we looked for data on a main topic, combining and overlaying different kind of information on cultural and social phenomena with many layers of context, as you can see from these previews, that we visualized through a unique language that was created and crafted specifically for the data stories that we were finding, as you can see from the previews. To working with clients such as IBM, where in 2017 we designed instead a system of guidelines for all of their data products, so all of their data visualizations. And first of all, guidelines on how to work with data visualization effectively on a daily basis, and so the mistakes to avoid and how to really rely on best practices. But also guidelines that could translate the great design heritage that IBM has built over the years into how they work with data. So guidelines that will make their chart really look and feel like IBM, taking, in this case, a clear visual inspiration from IBM's material from the past, and even venturing into looking at physical objects, part of the IBM tradition, exploring how the texture of number rows and columns on IBM's punch card can look like single elements that can be interacted with on a data visualization. To environmental experiences with data, this is for the Milan Triennial, was called Broken Nature at the Design Museum in Milan. And in this case, we created a data wallpaper, like a data tapestry for what we call the room of change. The data tapestry that, flowing on a timeline from left to right, illustrates how multiple aspects of our environment have changed in the past centuries, how they're still changing, and they will likely continue to change. And in this case, through a number of global data sets on nature, society, technology, and science, as well as single and specific stories that represent the micro consequences that we all can relate to, such as the disappearing of the Lake Aral, with a legend on the center to invite visitors to discover this world of change. It's always really an important part of really crafting a message that then audience can understand. And to really creating even more physical experiences with data, this is the recent Starbucks roastery, Reserve Roastery that opened in Milan in Italy 1 year ago. And here we designed a data visualization that was carved and etched in this big brass wall using different carving and perforation technique and backlighting to represent different data points. In this case, depicting the timeline of the history of the brand, the coffee making process, and also the places in the world that have been fundamental for Starbucks history. And in this case, another type of project that you can work on a data perspective, also a wall that can be experienced through an augmented reality mobile app that we designed and developed that brings this data to life. And so that can add a digital layer that interacts directly with the physical space of the wall. And well, the wall is in this case turned into a living artwork with access to many data-driven extra content. And one last piece of context, so where I am right now in this moment before digging into a few specific ideas that I want to share. So recently, before last summer, I joined Pentagram, which is the biggest independent design firm in the world, as a partner in their New York office. We are 25 partners globally. I was their ninth partner in New York, and we have offices in London, Berlin, and Austin. And this is a picture of us all at our last gathering. And Pentagram, to me, is an incredibly exciting place because I believe that my partners, way before I joined, have significantly contributed in shaping our collective visual culture for almost the past 50 years. forming our relationship with brands and the products that we use every day, and with our built environment through brand identity projects that we pretty much recognize all around, through signage and wayfinding and environmental graphic, really branding visually many of the iconic places that we walk by every day. And if you think about it, ultimately visually shaping a piece of our relationship with our society. And joining Pentagram for me means to further my practice and try to integrate the language of data into even more mundane experiences, into what we see, consume, and even wear. Because what is data? Well, for many of us, data feels not so connected with real life, and it might really have even a nebulous meaning, often only associated with numbers, technologies, and algorithm, and seen as scary and complicated, cold and inhuman, and really just overwhelming. But there's another approach to what we so coldly call data that has always interested me the most. That is to always remember that data is an abstracted representation of our reality, and therefore a lens and a filter that we can use to see our world through. Any aspects of our world, especially our human nature and our society, really one subject at a time. And then a narrative material to base design experiences on, because it's only through seeing this data represented visually that our human brain can actually grasp the meaning in them. And in fact, I titled my talk, and I'm really about to start, "The Data We Don't See," because what I want to talk about are the data that are not already in form of a spreadsheet, but that, in my opinion, are really the most interesting one that we need to focus on if we want to really unveil the hidden patterns that are all around it, and the one that can really unlock the potential of data to tell human and relatable story. And you will see what I mean. So I'll start with a very radical experiment where no technology was involved. It was a self-initiated project that, after years of working pretty much only on digital experiences, such as the one you've seen before, and also with quote-unquote like bigger data, really reconnected me to the very nature of data. It's called Dear Data, and it's a collaboration with London-based designer and now my friend Stephanie Pozovic. So Stephanie and I met only 2 times in our lives when we decided to run this weird experiment around one main question. That was, is it possible to get to know another human being through data only? Yes. So for Dear Data, every week and for 1 year, we used our personal data to really get to know each other. Personal data around weekly shared mundane topics, from our thoughts and our ideas to our most intimate feelings, from our belongings to our apologies and laughter. So 52 excuses in form of data to investigate and reveal a particular aspects of ourselves and about our days. And personal data that we would then manually hand-drawn on a postcard sheet of paper that was every week sent from London to New York, where I live, and from New York to London, where she lives. So the front was always a data drawing, so no explanation at all. But then the back of the postcard contained the address of the other person and the legend, so how to read our drawings. And so Stephanie and I collected our data manually to force us to focus on the nuances that computer and devices cannot gather, or at least not yet, and using data to explore really our minds and not only our activities, and getting insights and ideas on the things that matter the most to us. For example, like week number 3, we tracked the thank yous that we said and we received, who they were for and from, what they were about, if it was really meant, or if it was a courtesy thank. And in this example, by looking at my week through the lens of this particular layer, I realized that I thanked most of the people that I didn't know well, but I didn't thank enough the people that were close to me. You can try. So we started to look at our days through data, such as in this other case where I mapped my complaints, borrowing a very literal visual inspiration from the music notation system to show the repetitiveness of my complaints over time. But not only quantifying the numbers of times that we performed a certain action, instead really adding context and details about why, what was happening, what was the situation and the feeling, really realizing week after week how to put ourselves in these numbers. And the importance of adding context and qualitative aspects to make this data really representative of ourselves. And so over 52 weeks, we mapped our envies and what the feeling triggered in us. We mapped our desires and what they told about us, our emotions and decisions, apologies, and many more, really creating intimate portraits of ourselves to share with the other person through this invisible layer of data. And so I guess you start seeing what I mean by the data we don't see. And in this case, data that are much more interesting, in my opinion, than what we usually associate with personal data collection, such as number of steps, expenses patterns, or calories intake. I think there's really much more that we can explore. And this is true for small and big data, for personal data and beyond. So Dear Data also became a book that is at its third edition, and the original collection of postcards found the most exciting home as they've been acquired as part of the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art, which has been quite nice. But what excites me even more is that Dear Data, no, seriously, has been so well received from the public outside the data community. We've seen thousands of postcards made by people, not even designers or artists, who learned about the project and wanted to experiment on themselves. And even teachers of any grade are using this format to teach their students the world of data. And so really starting from human observation, from human questions, as opposed to what's the data that are already there. So with this project, you've seen that we can turn even the smallest details of our lives into data that we can look at to see things from a different perspective. But besides personal data, we can really do it everywhere. I am often asked, where do you find your data? And I'm replying more and more that I design my data sets. And you'll see what I mean with this other example. So in 2017, 2 years ago, I've had the great honor to collaborate with Paola Antonelli. She's the senior curator for design and architecture at MoMA, and with her team on a piece that closed a show that was called Items is Fashion Modern, that some of you might have seen. And so the show presented 111 items of clothing and accessories that have had a strong impact and influence on our culture. So even by just reading the list, from the bikini to the burkini, from the Patagonia fleece jacket to the balaclava, from the pearl necklace to the little black dress. And I've had this incredible opportunity to create a site-specific, hand-drawn, after Dear Data, visualization to guide visitors to explore the features of the items, both individually and then as part of a bigger ecosystem. But what's interesting here is that I didn't have any data. I only had the list of the 111 objects and the background research that was conducted by the curatorial team on each of them. And so I put on the glasses of the data collector and I really digged into these stories in search of bits of qualitative and quantitative information that could help me answer a few main questions and to understand and reveal why was each of the items included in the show. Why did Paola and her team really believe that these were iconic to show aspects of our culture and society? And so I asked, for example, is the item a medium or a message? Meaning, is it iconic because of its technical and aesthetical feature or for what it represents? Are they worn to conform to a movement or to escape to a movement? Meaning, has it become a way to blend into a social context or to break free from it? And many more questions of this kind, crafting a data set from these questions, where the data were absolutely not in this form before this analog process. And then each one of the items became a symbol that I drew on the wall, positioning and visualizing according to this set of attributes that I built together with the curators, with, of course, a legend on the left side wall to interpret it. And so the whole point of my exercise was to start from the final manifestation of this process and really work backwards, in a way reconstructing the invisible data set that Paola and her team used as an input for their design, even without knowing it. And then making it visible for everybody to see through the lens of data, something that to me is incredibly valuable. And in similar situations, I think we don't see these invisible layers. Well, first of all, because we often don't observe this and collect these more qualitative and human types of data, but also because nobody carefully designs experiences to elevate them and to reveal them when they were present all along. And design plays a very important role here. And moving on, I have a few examples that can make you hopefully see that strongly. So in 2017, the organizers of the TED conference came to us before their latest edition in Vancouver at the time with a challenging brief. So how can you use data from the conference participants to give something valuable back to them? So initially, we imagined to create an installation on a big wall where we could use an algorithm to match participants with similar profiles, such as their job position, where they were from. But ultimately, in which way would that be really meaningful? And once more, we decided to look for data in less obvious places, and we created what we called data portraits of the people who were at TED. So images that were based on people's answers to a series of questions and then translated into a unique hand-drawn data-driven image where every color, symbol, and position of the elements that you're seeing is a direct representation of one person's answer. And images that were then immediately printed on buttons that people would wear on top of their TED badges throughout the conferences. And they could use them as a tool for sparking conversations and finding commonalities with others. And we asked simple but evocative questions that you can read here on the right, such as, which TED letter are you? Technology, entertainment, or design? Or do you get your best ideas after an adult beverage or while at work? How messy is your desk? Or how many unread emails in your inbox before you freak out? Yeah. And people at TED were wearing their abstract symbol on their badges and really used them to identify similarities and differences with other people at a first glance, and an excuse to introduce themselves, and really an icebreaker to start a conversation that is much more personal and meaningful rather than saying, hi, I'm Giorgia, I'm an information designer, what do you do? And so here we've worked with soft and definitely small data that in this case I believe proved to be much more meaningful than anything we could have gathered digitally or automatically, or that anything that was already in form of data. We replicated this data portrait idea at a few other events where the information, the questionnaire, was sent in advance to the attendees, and where, of course, again, the portrait always comes with a legend. And finally, we recently turned this concept into a completely interactive and collective installation that you will be able to see after this here at the museum. And it's part of the show that was introduced before, Who We Are, Visualizing New York by the Numbers, that it's upstairs. And it's an exhibition, of course, in anticipation of the 20th census that highlights the importance of the upcoming census. And as we can read from the official description of the show, New York is a dense, chaotic mosaic of some 8.5 million people, each with their own individual stories. How can we possibly understand and describe this endlessly complex collectivity, what we share and what distinguishes us? And I've been invited with my team, we've been invited to create an original piece to reflect on how we understand ourselves and how we count ourselves. And so we called our piece What Counts, and with that, we sort of questioned the fundamental information that are asked on the census, at least for making us think about it. And so what counts as two fundamental components are a large projection on the gallery wall and an interactive iPad interface in the middle of the space. And so as they walk by, visitors can answer a short questionnaire on an iPad about themselves and their identity. And for example, here are some of the questions. If you had to pick only one, which of the following best describes you? Responsible and reliable, ambitious and driven, imaginative and creative, and so on. Compared to others, I believe I am completely unique in most ways, unique in some ways, but similar in others, or similar in most ways. Really starting to reflect about how we see ourselves. And if you had to pick only one, which of the following is most important to you? Living by my values, earning fame or recognition, belonging to a circle of family or friends, or contributing positively to my community, and much more? How do you personally define home as opposed to where's your home? Where I currently live, where I was born, where my friends are, I don't feel like I have a home. Or do you feel that what you currently have in life is enough? Yes, but I want more. Yes, I'm grateful for it. And you get the point. And this one is about what you would hope the next generation will enjoy better than you. And finally, is the future bright or grim? And so, as you might have guessed, then a unique visual symbol is generated on the iPad as you move through the survey. So a data portrait that represents the combination of your answers. And once the survey is completed, you can physically swipe your data portraits to the gallery wall, where it will join an animated projection of all the data portraits that have been collected since the beginning, with looping images that will show a portion of them, because now there are very many, so we're not really able to show them everyone. And so in this case, your portrait is contributing to the dynamic graphic on the wall, creating a collective representation of us. And as you saw before, we conceived the questions, of course, as a sort of provoking response to the questions that are asked in the census, which in this case are pretty much only demographic. And the idea was really to invite us to think about how do we want to be counted and what matters the most to count about us. And finally, we intentionally designed the data portraits as hand-drawn and imperfect to contrast with the clinical charts that are typically used to visualize census data. And then in the projection, each element of the portrait is also visually unpacked and explained. So we're also revealing the singular responses to each question. So how many people who participated kind of clustered around the specific answer to a specific question. A legend, of course, is close to the projection to interpret what you're seeing, which, as you've seen, is really a very, very important part of my work, to really give people the possibility to understand what's in there. And to be reminded of the collective experience, as it was introduced in the beginning. After you leave, you could also go and print your data portrait on a button to take home and wear. And these are some of the first ones that we printed. Of course, they are hooked to a legend. And so the installation here continues to collect data throughout the next months, in this case also creating an ongoing visual record of the visitors of the museums who decide to participate, anonymized visual record of the museum. And so I guess that at this point, you got a sense of the type of design work that I do with data, not probably the most obvious type. And this other experience that I want to share before a final project is something we probably all can relate to, and it deals with information on the medical field. This project is a collaboration with my dear friend and guitar player, Kaki King. And 2 years ago, Kaki's 3-year-old daughter, Cooper, was diagnosed with a condition called ITP, which is an autoimmune disease where her body attacks her platelets and leads to spontaneous bruises, burst blood vessels called petechia all over her body, and in the most terrifying cases, even internal bleeding. And for 4 months, we collected and combined quantitative data for Cooper, her daughter test, and qualitative observation from Kaki, data from her life, her home level of stress and the main episodes that happened. And she decided to share this very personal journey, not with words, but through this data that we collected. And so I visualized this data in a way that you wouldn't probably normally expect from medical data, because these data are really intimate and very intense. And so I asked myself, can a data visualization also evoke empathy and activate us also at an emotional level and not only at a cognitive one? Can really a data visualization make us feel part of another human being's story and experience? And so I structured a fluid timeline to tell the story of these 4 very hard months for Kaki and her family. Every symbol you see here represents a data point, like every white petal is a day. And the rhythm is broken on the timeline. It is not linear. Every time that Cooper was admitted to the hospital to check her platelet counts, because actually these moments really paced the 4 months of data collection, the 4 months of their lives. And the burst of red dots represent the value, the petechia value that was counted. The platelet counts. And then we had data as observed by Kaki herself, like the purple splotches to represent the visible bruises and their intensity. And so in all days, the more Kaki was observing the intensity of the bruises, the more intense is the brush. Or the pink dots for petechia, which are the blood marks on her skin and how spread out they were. And then when Cooper was taking medications such as steroids, you will see the gray shapes affecting the day. And here is where Cooper had some incident that caused her skin to worsen, such as she fell at the park or she was bitten by a mosquito. But also there's all what's going on in Kaki's life and in her mind and in their lives. Kaki tours a lot, and she felt very stressed when away from home in this particular period of time, and that is indicated with these black dots on the day that she was gone. But in these dark months, there have been also positive moments that they wanted to remember, such as a fun birthday party for Cooper and her brother, or a great Halloween night that I represented with these bright yellow spots that cheer up the visual in a way. And lastly, Kaki also kept track of her own level of hope and her level of fear for the day that she reported on a scale from 1 to 10 from both emotion, and that I visualized with the numbers of these floating lines, where the dark lines are her fears and the orange lines are their hopes. And all around, we added bits of Kaki's personal notes for each day. And this visual was also used as a musical score by Kaki to create a piece of music that she composed directly from the 4 months of data collection, where the timeline of the song represent what was happening in their life exactly as the data visualization. And I will play the song for you for a little bit, and I am inviting you to see if you feel something through this data. So as you can probably see, this is not by any means a scientific representation of data, but still I think it paints a pretty complete and very sensorial picture of this very personal journey. And many people living similar experiences told us that the visualization made them really feel part of Kaki's stories in a way that probably a blog post or an article wouldn't have. And I don't want to say that this can lead to any scientific breakthrough in the medical field. This is not the point of my work. But once more, I believe that there's a world of unexplored small and intimate data that we often don't see if we apply a straightforward definition of what we think the data is. And a layer that we also don't see because visualizations often focus on the numbers and not on what the numbers represent. What if, for example, hospitals and doctors could also speak this type of language to us, and we could speak this language to them and to the people who are close to us in these very personal journeys? And I know that many of you are wondering, Cooper is absolutely fine now. She's out of the danger zone. She's healthy and thriving, and she says hi. And I will definitely end with a lighter note. This last example is possibly the most exciting project that I've worked on. It's a fashion collection that I had the honor to design for the fashion brand And Other Stories, which is part of the H&M group. So it's a data-driven collection that was out in November of last year. And it's a collection where the graphic patterns printed, embroidered, and sewed are the direct representations of, I think, very human data points. And in this case, we went and looked for data into the achievement of 3 unprecedented women who've been pioneers in previously male-dominated fields and then who paved the ground for other women to start and thrive. So the 3 women are Ada Lovelace, the first computer programmer, Rachel Carson, the first environmentalist, environmental activist, and Mae Jemison, who is the first Afro-American woman astronaut. And for the 3 of them, I crafted a dataset about their major accomplishments, so really what they did, their achievement and their contributions to the field, and then background information on their lives. And data that then obviously I create to create the patterns that you will see displayed in the collection. And so hopefully beautiful patterns that you would want to wear, but they also have a meaning behind them that you hopefully are also proud to carry with you. And now that you've seen my approach and the role of crafting dataset that plays in my work, I'll guide you through the process of the creation so that you see how data can, the design creation, so you can see how data can inform all type of products and outcomes. So the first woman is Ada Lovelace. She was born in 1815, and she's considered now to be the first computer programmer in history. And it was the first time that somebody programmed a machine to do complex math, and really, as a matter of fact, originating the discipline of computer science. And so I analyzed and visualized the structure and the mathematical form of the algorithm that she wrote. And I was really looking at the data and all of the variables that I could use to really represent the contribution that she made. But in parallel, I was also looking for visual inspiration in pieces of art or visual clues that could reflect the nature of the data that I was working with. So geometric and repetitive, but with variation and alterations. And then I started to sketch different ways, again, with the data in my mind, in which each one of the 36 steps and its variables could be represented. And then starting to aggregate them and started to play with visuals that could work nicely, probably not only on a white piece of paper, but also on an element of clothing. Starting also to sketch how to display them on a piece of garment. The team at Other Stories, they were so great, they let me play with sketching out silhouettes, which was fun, of course. And this is the selected option with vertical elements, one for each of the 36 steps of the algorithm. And then you start seeing how the repetition of each one form an interesting visual model. And so each one of this 36 line of Ada's algorithm is one element with internal dividers representing their variables. And without entering into details, you see from this legend that every symbol, colors, and dividers, and outside the graphic element represent a data point that is direct linked to the algorithm. And so this is the final pattern for Ada that leaves into the silhouettes that they designed. And these are some ideas that I crafted on how to place it all over. So really taking the pattern as it is, but also then figuring out how we can aggregate it or using it also in some particular accents, or as a bold accent, for example, on a sweater, or even more creative placements on a shirt. And these are the final pieces. So you can really see how a single pattern that looks kind of like pretty bidimensional can really take like and form in these creations. And as part of the process, there's been a lot of back and forth between design, testing, and send me samples overseas from Sweden where they're located, which I actually enjoyed. And as part of the shooting for the publicity, a beautiful model was posing as I actually recreated the legend behind her, which again, as you've seen, it's really important for me to show every type of possible customers or person who's interested that they can really read the data. And the process got repeated from the other women. So Rachel Carson, first environmental activist, and her book, Silent Spring, it was published in 1962 and is really the classic that launched the environmental movement. And in this case, I went and looked for data in the structure of the book and also the content, the words that she mentioned the most, the flow of the narrative. And in this case, building my inspiration around more organic shapes that could really talk about the content of the book and the content of, her body of work. And these are some of the first sketches where every element could be a chapter of Rachel's book, and the different lengths of the lines can be the lengths of the paragraph, and then we can have like colors on top that represent the topics. And here's like how I build the pattern. Every radial element is one of the 17 chapters. The lines are the number of paragraphs and their lengths. And on the left of each element, there's the aggregation of core structural elements such as number of words, punctuations, and sentences. And building on top of it, I look on the whole book to see what were the nouns and adjectives that she mentioned the most. So just zooming in, chemical, insects here, bird, insecticide, control, DDT, life, area, water, plants. And then I looked into how much they've been mentioned per each chapter, and they become like the lengths of the lines. And that has been done for words and adjectives. And so really building the final pattern with the combination of these two layers with the 17 chapters with different background colors. And these are the final silhouettes, almost the final silhouettes. And you get the point. So placing patterns in different ways on the fabrics, as I did with Ada, really collaborating very closely with their in-house fashion design team, getting bolder with the sweaters. That was supposed to be a wetsuit, but now is just a body. And so here we go with the final pieces. And again, you can see how a pattern that can leave like a data visualization as it is a representation of a content then can also be translated into different ways. And this is one of the samples where the patterns that I embroidered on the fabric, and I have to say that they've really been paying a close attention to details. The model wearing them one on top of the other for the shooting as I was recreating the legend. And then finally, Mae Jemison, she was born in 1967 and she's still alive, and she's been the first African-American woman astronaut. And in this case, I visualized the orbits of her 1992 space shuttle mission. And, as you might guess, then taking visual inspiration from circular patterns, so recalling orbits and really recalling the body of work and the achievement and the contributions that she did. And starting to sketch the orbits, possible features in different ways. And finally landed on this version when one circle is one orbit, we will have 126 of them. And this is the final pattern where again, all of these elements are orbits, and the symbols above represent which day she orbited around Earth in September 1992, and the color shadow represent the time of the day for the orbit. So really an homage to her mission and the color of the sky as she might have seen it from above. And on the background, they're represented all of the experiments that she performed when she was in space. So from radio transmission to countries that have never been reached before, to zero gravity experiments. And again, elements of the collection as we thought of them initially, possible placements, even different colors, a shirt, and then they are with the final patterns. Again, you really, really see that they're part of the same family of data, but they're worked on in the garments differently. And there's also an extra puffer for the winter. And then the model wearing them. And then finally, for each woman, we also designed a t-shirt where we extracted only one element of the pattern as a bold signature. And finally, when customer bought any of the garments in store, they got a paper bag that I designed containing the pattern and the legend, of course, how to interpret what's in the texture. And which, again, for me is always a crucial point of my work. And it's probably, I know that not everybody will nerd out dissecting Ada's algorithm from here, but at least they can really know that what they are wearing have a deep meaning. And so what excites me about this project and why I wanted to conclude with it is that to me, it's also another step to further demystify data. For example, I see this specific project as one of the possible evolution to the graphic t-shirt with a message, with a written message. And in this case, the fabric itself becomes the message. And it can really become deep and rich and have many multiple messages inside it. So where every feature of a garment, if we think about it, can be deeply connected to information and messages that we are proud and happy to carry around with. And also the reason why I am particularly interested in these less conventional but perhaps more popular projects with data is their potential to reach a wider audience that might start thinking about data in a different way, an audience that might not have been reached by data before. And the opportunity to discover and reveal the human side of data, which is, of course, the one that matters the most. So to conclude, over the years, I built my approach and practice around what I call data humanism, which to me means always to design ways to connect numbers with what they really stand for, which are our ideas, the unexplored and open questions that we have about ourselves and our society. And then through design, making this new knowledge available for everybody to hopefully access and engage with. And I'm really excited about the possibilities opened up by this way of looking at data in this very moment in time. And I hope that you can be too. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Giorgia. I think I can speak for all of us when I say we enjoyed looking at all of your work across puffy jackets and smartphones and all sorts of things. I thought I'd start with a question that you showed us tonight and which is upstairs too. And it starts, compared with others, which already out of the gate were dangerous. Like that's like a recipe for sadness, right? But compared with others, do you consider yourself to be entirely unique, mostly unique, similar to some people in some ways and unique in others, or mostly similar? And that about yourself, I think maybe too personal for our new friend. So I'm wondering if you can answer that for your work and why.
Well, okay. I think completely unique, because I think that pretty much everybody's work can be completely unique. I would say completely unique.
And would you think that when people get a button upstairs, like say they make a data portrait and it's exactly the same as someone else's data portrait,
it doesn't mean that they're similar. It doesn't mean that they're equal people. It means that for these questions that they're answering from this very moment in time, they have similarities and they can talk about.
Can you talk a little more about what you are optimizing in your work when I look at your work, I think I would agree that it's unique. It's recognizable. You can take your name off of it, and I can still recognize that it comes from you, I think. And I think that's a compliment. And I think that's in some ways why it resonates with people. But it is strikingly different from a lot of the data visualization that is closer to the media work that I know. And I think that's because you're optimizing something else. The work that I think I am more familiar with, it's either trying to often, like when you think of something boring like a bar chart, it's trying to optimize precision. Or if you think of other kind of more boring forms like a scatter plot, is trying to recognize the efficiency of drawing out a pattern. Yeah. I know that is not what you're optimizing, and I'm wondering if you could tell us what you are optimizing.
Yeah, I've never thought about like optimizing, but I think that in general, I mean, every type of work with data and every type of design project, and in general, every type of project, I mean, it really needs to have clearly in mind the audience and the goal. And so I always say that, of course, I mean, if you're designing a dashboard for a pilot to land a plane, well, you probably, I mean, wouldn't ask him to read a legend, and so you would really would go for, but if like a lot of my work is more, I would say, in the entertainment field and general communication field, and most of the time I like to require people a level of engagement to experience it and to take time to to really learn how to read a new language that has been crafted specifically for the data that I'm working with. And so I think that in general, I'm trying to optimize the idea of conveying complexity and richness as opposed to simplification, because I believe that data visualization for me in this specific case is, again, not for immediate decision-making purposes, but should be about giving access to the complex reality that we live in as opposed to simplifying it. And sometimes the forms of visualization that are mostly used, such as bar charts and pie charts, and I don't have anything against them, but I think that most of the times they do simplify, and it can be okay, but we need to know that this is really a simplification that doesn't take into account all of the layers of context that can be added. And I also think that, in your work, which is amazing, by the way, and we all know that, you have a driven goal, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So there's, I think, pretty much that.
Talk to me about the idea of data versus the data itself. Like, say, for example, you got a legend wrong. Does it matter? Or how much does it matter? Say you made a mistake in a data portrait in the pin. And
What do you mean by a mistake? A mistake of a line? A mistake of a translation?
Well,
first of all, you shouldn't get a legend wrong. You shouldn't make mistakes in general.
But does it affect the work, right? Like, so pretend the legend, you say the shy people are outgoing and the outgoing people are shy. That changes the direction of the line, or that changes the color, right? Like, you just make a mistake in the legend.
I didn't kill anybody, so it's fine.
But
I think that my work is not,
Yeah, but I think it is actually like a really interesting divide, though, about like what you are encoding. Like, lots of your work is about making a language, and so, but some of that language, I think, is about the idea of complexity.
That's interesting. I think that visually you should render the ideas that you had when you build the data set. And so, yes, if you want to convey dense and complex systems of information, and if you want to convey that, yes, we are rich and articulated human beings, but we are imperfect, well, then the way that you craft, and then imperfection is really, I think, what was fascinating, because otherwise, we'll be all very boring. I think that then you need to visually convey that. And this is also why I was telling in the end when I was showing the project with Kaki that we called Bruises, is that sometimes, most of the time, data visualization focus on the numbers and not on what the numbers represent. And so I think that in this case, it's all about like playing with the idea of data, or the data, or what data represents. And there are multiple ways to do it. I think that we work in a field where, of course, there are things that we should avoid doing, such as like really common mistakes that we all know as practitioners that we should avoid, but these are really just very obvious. But other than that, there's an infinite realm of possibilities, and so I wouldn't say that there's like a unique way to do things. Right.
Are there mistakes that drive you nuts? I often think one of my favorite colleagues taught me that designers, people who are really good designers like yourselves, they live with a sort of special burden. His thing was like curly apostrophes that like many times you see them straight, and and once he taught you to see it and to be hurt by it, like you're just hurt constantly all day long. And I think people who really know typography, it's hard to live in the world like that. And I'm wondering if you carry any special burdens.
I know, because every time I design a thing that is completely new and completely unique, and so I don't really reference a lot of standard charts. I think that in general, the things that are just annoying to most of us, like when a pie chart doesn't add up to 100. Come on. What's yours?
Oh, I don't know. These are my questions. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's totally fair. I should have one. I think some of the work, and you said it tonight, but some of the work that you are most famous for, maybe not anymore now that you're making H&M and Starbucks things or whatever, but before in the data viz world, I think one of the things that you are most known for is your project with Stephanie, the Dear Data, the postcards that you sent to each other. And the first time I heard you talk about the thing, and you said it tonight, it was stunning to me that you were mere acquaintances before you began that project, before you began a project that involved collecting data all week long and spending hours on the weekend, like making something like that's intimate and honest and witty and whatever. And I know you also think of data visualization as a sort of a language, and that Stephanie grew to be like a really important person to you, like in the world. I'm wondering if there are ideas that could not be communicated on those postcards, if you wanted to, or the other way, the idea that like you could only say it through some structured information.
Yeah, I mean, this is such an interesting question. I think that for us, the postcards were interesting entry points to get to know each other's, and like entry points that were definitely already rich in information and definitely already full of details about who we are. And also I would say that not only the data that you collect, but how you collect data tells a lot about yourself. So like every week with Stephanie, then I'm answering your question. But like every week with Stephanie, we agreed upon a topic. So let's say complaints, thank yous, apologies, envies. But the data collection was up to us. And so the questions that we asked ourselves was really up to us. And I think that throughout the collection of postcards is interesting to really, really see what were the things that I was interested in exploring about complaints, and what are the things that she was interested in exploring. And we came up with two completely different data sets, not only because our lives and our personalities are different, but really also for the entry points that we used. And so, again, we shared with each other, let's say, about a topic already like a very rich and dense, intimate portrait, but then they really became further excuses to talk and to communicate things with each other and to ask further questions. And I always like to think that data and data visualization are a beginning of a conversation, and it's really great to have data, but data they don't solve all of our problems, and they don't answer to all of our questions. So again, they were entry points. And then, in general, we tried over 52 weeks to compose a portrait of the other person that could be, let's say, the more complete possible. And so we surveyed our thoughts, our activities, even our belongings, and things that we call like performative, so like challenges to be nicer or to do things in a way that challenged us. But then, of course, there's so much that is left out. But that's true with any type of relationship or person that you get to know, and also things evolve over time. So, yeah.
That leads me to a different question that is upstairs, is where is home for you? Where you were born, where you live, where your friends and family are,
I live.
Or nowhere.
Where
you live, which is New York.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you grew up in Italy, am I right?
Yeah, I did.
Do you have anything smart to tell us about Italian design versus American design?
Oh, wow.
And I do think there are like cultural differences, but I could not tell you anything smart about what they are. But again, these are my questions.
Sure. Well, I did not study design. I'm an architect, so I studied architecture, and then I moved to the U.S. not super soon after my degree, but I would say that I practiced design honestly more in the U.S. rather than in Italy in terms of just like time span, because I've been here for almost 8 years, and pretty much all of my professional life I've been here. So I don't know. I would say that in general, growing up in being born and raised in Italy, you live live in museums with so many beautiful things and history around you. And I think that even if your parents are not specifically like trained in cultural design or art, they really know how to explain you what you're seeing in a church and what you're seeing in an historical building, and some aesthetic qualities that I feel still resonate with me because I think experienced them in an early phase. So I think that to me is what can influence, is really the environment that you live in, and that gets embedded into everything. But home is New York, and I love it here. So
that idea about how to see, I'm wondering, I think the clothing work that you showed us, and maybe the music behind the collaboration with your friend, those were new ventures for you, and I'm wondering if those things teach you how to see in a different way. Like, do you see sweaters in a different way now than you did before you did that project?
Well, I pretty much wear only black, so that's also I designed a colorful collection that I sort of like never wear because of that. But no, I don't know. I think that learning how to see is such an important aspect of learning how to design, because if you can't, or making any type of visual art, because you need to recognize what you like of what you see, and what are the features of anything, like a piece of art or anything that you are attracted to. What are these features that you like? Is it like the combination of the colors? Is it the composition? Is it the overall elegance? Is anything else? And then I think that over time you learn how to parse them and to embed it into your design. In general, I do take a lot of visual inspiration for every project that I work on. I spend a lot of time getting inspired by things that I feel that might be resonating with the topic or with the audience or with the brand. So I think, I try to trade myself to see a lot.
Yeah. When our new friends are allowed to go upstairs in a few minutes, I'm wondering if there is anything that you would like to tell them that you particularly, if I take your work, so upstairs, if you haven't been to the third floor, there's many pieces of art or exhibits, data-related, census-related, data portraits, you can make your own. Is there something that one of them upstairs that is not your own piece that you particularly like that you want to make sure people don't miss tonight?
I really, really think that it's like the whole exhibition that needs to be experienced all together, and I think that like the museum curators and also the exhibition designers have done such a great job in actually really guiding you from the very beginning through the end into experiences. What is the census? What have been done so far? What are the earliest manifestation of it? What are some contemporary interpretation of it, and how you can think about yourself through it? So I really believe that is the whole experience that should really speak, as opposed to like one individual piece. It's really a show that to me it's the combination of all of them.
Great. Well, in that case, I think we want to leave you time to go see it, or to talk to the census person in the lobby, or Giorgia, I understand, is staying too. So if you have more questions for Giorgia, there'll be time for that.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you everybody for coming.